Hi everyone. Roscoe and I thought we would bring you on one of our little walks that we go on because there is a sculpture here, a famine memorial, that we thought you'd be interested in seeing. This is called the Edward Delaney Famine Memorial. It's a sculpture that you can find inside one of the gates of St. Stephen's Green, which is the big park at the top of Grafton Street. This gate is opposite the hotel, the Shelburne. So Edward Delaney was a quite famous sculptor. He died in 2009 and he did a lot of sculptures. There is a sculpture of his in front of Trinity College of Thomas Davis. There's a sculpture of his on the other side of this stone wall here of Wolfe Tone, who you might remember as being one of the big leaders during the 1798 rebellion. But this is his sculpture to commemorate the famine, and he did it in an abstract style and using a technique called lost wax casting. So it's a cast sculpture, which means they make a cast, they fill it with liquid metal, in this case bronze, and that's how the sculpture is made. So I want you to have a think about that. Why did he make it this way? Why choose an abstract style? Why not choose a realistic style? What do you think of when you look at the sculpture? When you look at the bodies and their shapes? Why do you think they've been done in this way? What does it make you feel? Here we have a really interesting famine memorial. It's actually this ship across the Liffey. It's called the Genie Johnston, and it's a replica of a famine ship. So we'll go over now and have a closer look. The Genie Johnston is a replica. So that means it's not actually the coffin ship itself. It is a recreation that was built in more modern times. The original ship was built in 1847 in Quebec in Canada, and it was supposed to be a cargo ship, but it ended up carrying desperate emigrants from Ireland to Canada, and on its way back to Ireland it would bring back timber for sale. Over the course of its life it carried 2,500 emigrants from Ireland to Canada over 16 voyages, and the ship's captain was famous for making sure there were good conditions and hiring a surgeon. So unlike most of the other ships of this era, the Genie Johnston did not have any of its passengers die on board. In fact, it's famous as being the ship that never lost a life but actually gained one, and that's because on its maiden voyage a pregnant woman gave birth on the ship, so they actually ended up getting to Canada with one more person than they had when they left. So the original ship sank in 1858, and they made this replica. It was finished in 2002, and it was built in County Kerry. And it's hard for you to see here because it was closed obviously today, so I couldn't get very close, but on its prow, which is the front of the ship, there's a figurehead. You might know a little bit about figureheads from learning about Viking ships, which sometimes had dragon figureheads. But in later times, most figureheads were images of people, and quite often women. So the figurehead on the Genie Johnston is actually someone you've learned about, which is the pirate queen Rania Whale. A short walk away from the Genie Johnston, you'll find the Epic Museum, and that's a museum all about people emigrating from Ireland, because the famine may have been the beginning of a lot of Irish people emigrating, but it wasn't the end, and that's why today there's 5 million people in Irish, but up to 70 million people around the world say that they are part of the Irish family. Just after the Epic Museum, you will find this other famine memorial. This is also cast in bronze, just like the one in Stephen's Green, but you'll notice the figures here look very different from the abstract ones in Stephen's Green. This memorial was put here in 1997, and the artist's name was Rowan Gillespie. So have a look at these figures. Can you see a lot more emotion, a lot more feeling? Can you understand a little bit more about what these people might have been feeling at the time? Why do you think they're put at the side of a river. Is it maybe because they're on their way to a coffin ship? In 2007, President Mary McAleese, who was the President of Ireland at the time, unveiled a similar memorial, also by Rowan Gillespie, but this time it was on the side of a river in Ontario, in Canada, to show these refugees arriving in Canada. So again, like the last one, have a think. And my final question on this one is, what is the purpose of the dog? Look at the dog and think, why is he there? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that one, so it'll be interesting to see what you think. Okay, so now we're going to look at two other famine memorials, but these ones are a little bit too far away for me and Roscoe to visit. They're certainly outside of the 5-kilometre limit that we are to stick to at the moment. So this one here is in the town of Drogheda in the county of Louth. And Louth is a county that's a little bit to the north of Dublin. It's not very far away. And here we see this plaque which commemorates the generosity of the people of Turkey towards the people of Ireland. So while our previous memorials were more to do with the sadder part of the famine, this one is to do with something a little bit more positive, which is other people in other places in the world reaching out to Ireland at this time to show support for them. And Turkey was one of those countries. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that now. So at this time, we know the famine started in 1845, but one of the worst years, and the year that the plaque mentions, was 1847. At this time, there wasn't actually a country called Turkey on the map, and you can see that a lot of the names of the countries and the shapes surrounding them, especially on the European continent, are quite different. The reason for that was because of empires. An empire is when one country, a powerful country, takes over another country or part of it, or takes over a lot of other countries. And at this time in history, there were lots of empires. Ireland was not called Ireland, it was part of the British Empire, and you can see it up there in pink on the map. Now, this map doesn't show the full extent of the British Empire. It was one of the largest empires in the world, and in fact at this time it was the largest empire in the world, and it covered India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, huge parts of Asia, lots of parts of Africa, and parts of South America too. So that's the British Empire. Turkey was the centre of the Ottoman Empire, and you can see it down here in blue on the bottom right. So the Ottoman Empire covered Turkey, it covered some parts of Greece, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, lots of other countries were part of the Ottoman Empire. So the ruler of the Ottoman Empire was called the Sultan, and Sultan Abdulmehid had a dentist who was Irish, and he told him about the suffering of the Irish people. So Sultan Abdulmehid was very moved when he heard about the suffering of the Irish people, and he decided to donate £10,000 of his own money to help. £10,000 might not seem like a lot to you, but we have to remember that back in 1847, money was worth different amounts. Things were cheaper, everything was a lot cheaper. So £10,000 then is really actually more like €1,000,000 today. So that's what he wanted to donate. Here's £10,000. Doesn't that sound very generous? Don't you think people would have been very happy to receive that gift? But actually, Queen Victoria, who was the Queen of England and therefore the ruler of the entire British Empire, was not happy to receive this gift. And the reason for that was because she had already donated £2,000, and her advisors told her it would look very bad if she, the ruler of Ireland, donated only £2,000 when this foreign sultan was willing to donate £10,000. So she refused the Sultan's gift, and instead he donated £1,000. So that's an interesting part of that story. He wanted to donate a lot more to help, but he was refused. So what he did instead was he sent ships from Thessaloniki, which would now be considered part of Greece, but back then it was part of the Ottoman Empire. And he sent ships from there to Ireland. And the place they landed, the river they sailed up the River Boyne, which is in the centre of the town of Drogheda. And that is why that plaque exists in Drogheda today. So the people of Drogheda and the people of Ireland were obviously very grateful for the Sultan's gift, not just the money, but also all of the food and supplies on the ships. But here we get a bit of confusion in history, because if you go to Drogheda, you will see carved on stones and buildings in lots of places in Drogheda the crescent, moon and star symbol. And it's even here on the Drogheda United Football Club's uniform. There's the crescent, moon and the star, which also appears on the flag of Turkey. And a lot of people think that the crescent, moon and star that you see in lots of places in Drogheda is also linked with this story, that it's also to do with people in Drogheda saying thank you to the people of Turkey for their help during the famine. But it's actually not true. You can see here the same crescent, moon and star exists on the coat of arms of the town of Drogheda. And a coat of arms is like a symbol that represents your town or your family. And this coat of arms was given to the town of Drogheda in the year 1210. And the crescent, moon and star symbol was taken from the coat of arms of King John of England, who was the person who bestowed this coat of arms on Drogheda. So we can see then that that star and crescent moon that you see around Drogheda has nothing to do with the famine, because it's from 1210, which is nearly 650 years earlier. But we do know that that plaque on the wall in Drogheda is to tell that story, to say thank you very much for the help from Turkey and the Ottoman Empire during the famine. Now let's look at a second memorial, which tells a similar story. This memorial is called Kindred Spirits, and you can find it in County Cork. I wonder, can you guess what this might represent? You might think these are leaves, but they're actually feathers. And the feathers are placed here in the shape of a bowl, and the bowl is to symbolize the lack of food that people had at the time. But the feathers are there to symbolize something else. The feathers are there to symbolize Native American people, and in particular a nation of Native American people called the Choctaw. And the Choctaw used a lot of feathers in their ceremonies, so that's why they're used here in this sculpture. But what does a Native American nation like the Choctaw have to do with the Irish famine? Well, 5th class have been learning something about this. The Choctaw Nation were a group of Native American people, and they were very poor, and they had suffered a lot because earlier on, before the famine, they had been forced by the American government to leave the lands their people had lived in for hundreds of years and travel to a new home 500 miles away. They had to walk there. A lot of people were hungry, didn't have enough food to eat, and a lot of people died on that journey. And it's often called the Walk of Tears or the Journey of Tears. So these were a people who had really had a really hard time and some really bad luck, and they did not have much money at all. However, when they heard what was happening in Ireland, because at the time the Vice President of the United States said to his people, look what's happening in Ireland, can we help? And the Choctaw people, even though they had very little, knew exactly what it was like to be hungry, and exactly what it was like to suffer, and exactly what it was like to have to leave their homes. So they collected together £170. And again, that probably doesn't sound like much, but £170 then would be like close to €15,000 now. And if you can imagine, that's a lot of money for people who are poor. So they collected that money and they donated it to help Irish people during the famine. And as a result, we have that beautiful sculpture now in Cork, Kindred Spirits, to represent that. But there's another more recent interesting part to this story. We know that at the moment people are dealing with COVID-19 and it has been very difficult for a lot of people. In America, the Navajo and Hopi people, who are different nations within the Native American people of the United States, at the moment those Native American people have been struggling a lot because they haven't had enough money to feed themselves and to buy the things that they need. So some Irish people thought, wouldn't it be a nice idea to put together a website to get Irish people to donate money to them? Because more than 150 years ago, the Native American people reached out and helped us. So now, wouldn't it be nice to return the favour? And you can see from this picture here that so far, this fundraiser has raised $7 million. So, I hope you've enjoyed those two stories, because I think sometimes when we study something like the famine, it can sound very sad and it can sound very dark, and it was. And we can't pretend that that's not true, because it was a horrible time. But can we see nice positive things that came out of it? A lovely relationship between the people of Turkey and the people of Ireland. A similar relationship between the Native American people and the people of Ireland. And now, even 150, 160, 170 years later, that relationship still exists. And Irish people are now reaching out to help people back. So I hope you enjoyed those stories. What I would like you to do with those stories is simply this. Pick one. Pick one of these famine memorials and do what you want with it. What I mean by that is you could write a story about it. You could pretend that you're one of the people in the Stephen's Green sculpture, or one of the people in the Custom House sculpture, and you could write a diary. Or you could pretend that you're on the Genie Johnston and you could write a letter to somebody. But it doesn't have to be writing, it could be art. You could do a drawing of one of those memorials. You could make your own sculpture. You could write a song, anything you want, but just pick one of those memorials and make something out of it. Writing, music, art, tell me a story, record it on Seesaw, whatever you want, and I'd be really interested to see those.